So, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Welcome to all of you. First of all, welcome to the Commissioner-designate Mrs. Kadri Simson, whose portfolio, as proposed by the President-elect Madame von der Leyen, is dedicated to energy. I would like to welcome everyone present in this room today, including the members of ITRE committee, which is the main responsible for this hearing, and ENVI members, ENVI committee being associated to this hearing. Our meeting is going to be web streamed, so welcome to everyone who is watching us online. Let me recall that the ITRE committee is responsible for the Union's energy policy, and we all know that energy plays a key role in our society. The Union is committed to fully accomplish all 5 dimensions of the energy union: energy security, internal energy market, energy efficiency, decarbonization, research, innovation, and competitiveness. Energy has a central role to play in delivering the European Green Deal, which will be presented within the 101st days of the new Commission and will be at the heart of its mandate. Please let me allow to recall how this morning's hearing will be conducted. In line with the guidelines for the approval of Commission, Parliament evaluates the Commissioners-designate on the basis of general competence, European commitment, and personal independence. It also assesses the knowledge of their prospective portfolio and their communication skills. We organize our work today as following. First, the Commissioner-designate will have 15 minutes presentation. Then we will have rounds of questions from first political groups, then the other members, according to DONT system. About these questions, each question will be up to 5 minutes, 1 minute for the question, 2 minutes for the answer, 1 minute a follow-up question, 1 minute the response to the follow-up question. The follow-up question should be on the same subject as the first question. I will try to keep the time strict, so please formulate your questions and the answers so that you will keep the time. The time is on the screens, so you can check how you're doing by watching that. So, this being said, first of all, Madame Kadri Simson, welcome. The floor is yours for 15 minutes.
Thank you, Honourable Chair of the ITRE Committee, Mrs. Adina Johanna-Valean, honourable members of the ITRE Committee and ENVI Committee. I am glad to be here in front of you today. This is not the first time I stand before the European Parliament, but for me it is certainly the most important. I am humbled and honoured by the decision of the President-elect Ursula von der Leyen to choose me as the Commissioner-designate responsible for energy. And it is a privilege to present my plans for your scrutiny, to be part of the European democracy in action. The thousands of people who take to the streets in Europe and around the world remind us constantly that there is nothing more urgent than climate and energy action. This is the #1 concern of the European citizens. That is why the President-elect has identified the European Green Deal as a flagship priority for her Commission. Energy policy will be essential to deliver on this priority. I know from personal experience, I was the Minister for Economy and Infrastructure, also responsible for energy, how challenging it is to work in this field. I know how important the task ahead is and how enormous the responsibility it entails. Over the past 5 years, the EU has made huge strides towards a real energy union across all its 5 dimensions. All the measures of the clean energy package were agreed by the Parliament, and the Council with broad support. This is a great legacy to build on. I want to acknowledge the work done by Commissioner Miguel Arias Cañete and Vice President Maros Šefčovič to get us where we are today. But most of all, let me pay tribute to the contribution of the ITRE and ENVI committees. Your work has made this progress possible. Thanks to you, the Parliament managed to lift the level of ambition of the initial clean energy package proposals and to ensure that each proposal was adopted with large majority. On average, 80% of the members voted in favour. This shows the value of unity. When we are united, the EU can deliver real change. But this is not the time to pause. Achieving climate neutrality by 2050 is the only sensible way to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius and prevent an environmental crisis. That is why the President-elect committed to make Europe the first climate-neutral continent by 2050 and proposed a European Green Deal to be taken forward under the guidance of Executive Vice President Frans Timmermans. I want to set out today how I intend, if confirmed as Commissioner, to advance on the EU energy policy. I embrace the vision of making Europe a climate-neutral continent by 2050. Under my watch as the Minister, Estonia adopted a long-term energy action plan to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 70% by 2030. At that time, this target was very ambitious. Today, Estonia is set to overshoot its renewables targets, with 33% in 2020 and 42% by 2030. I have learned that a transition process can work well when some clear choices are made. First and foremost, what all energy actors need from regulators is certainty and predictability. It is key to anchor expectations at an early stage. This is why the Commission will propose a European Green Deal in the first 100 days in office. The centrepiece will be the first European climate law setting the target of climate neutrality by 2050. This will be accompanied by a just transition fund. Having set the direction of travel, we will then take the next steps. We must build on the success of the Energy Union. Estonians have a reputation for being forward-looking people, but we know that in order to be successful in the future, one must be effective in the present. I commit to working hard on the implementation of the clean energy package. I will ensure Member States deliver ambitious national energy and climate plans by the end of December. Each Member State needs to play its part. In case of an ambition gap, I will make every effort to push Member States in the right direction and work with each of them to reach our goals. We need to tap the full potential of the clean energy for all Europeans package. There are more than 100 delegated and implementing acts yet to be adopted. This cannot wait. By implementing the existing legislation, we can reduce carbon emissions by 45% by 2030. The President-elect has said that we need to be more ambitious when it comes to our 2030 targets. She committed an emissions reduction of at least 50% by 2030, followed by a plan to move towards 55% in a responsible way. I will launch an evaluation about how legislation in the energy sector can deliver a more ambitious targets. Based on this, I will assess on the need to review the legislation. I will contribute to the work on the carbon border tax and on the review of the Energy Taxation Directive that will be led by Paolo Gentiloni. If appointed as Commissioner, I intend to mobilize energy policy at the service of the climate-neutral objective by further developing an integrated, interconnected, and properly functioning single market. I am convinced that a genuine internal market brings significant benefits and is essential in promoting renewable deployment. As a minister, I worked on the synchronization of the electricity network of the Baltic states with the continental network. Seen from Estonia, an electricity system managed and operated under common EU rules is an essential precondition for a well-functioning internal market, energy security, and solidarity in times of crisis. I hope to see this project close to completion by the end of this mandate. Unfortunately, integrated markets are not the norm everywhere in Europe. In the electricity market, we need a power system largely based on renewables with improved energy storage and increased interconnectivity. There are still too many blockages to cross-border trade and bottlenecks that need to be removed. We must make sure that interconnectivity targets are reached and that 70% of interconnector capacity is available to the market. I will endeavour to strengthen regional cooperation, in particular the existing 4 high-level groups, and make them work in greater synergy. I also intend to focus on the gas market. Gas will play a role in the transition towards climate neutrality. I want to examine how we can best make the gas regulatory framework and infrastructure fit for the future, contributing to decarbonisation through the use of low-carbon gases, such as hydrogen, and renewables. We also need to empower consumers and benefit from the use of liquefied natural gas. In this area, the cooperation with the United States has been successful. It should be continued. Market integration is also an infrastructural challenge. About €200 billion is needed until 2030 for investment in the missing links in the electricity market. We need networks that can support and promote the use of clean energy based on renewables and better energy storage. To exploit the full potential of our trans-European energy networks, I will complete the review of 10E regulation by 2020. The transition is also a huge investment challenge. We must harness all the instruments available at EU level to leverage private funding for green, future-proof investments. The combined funding under the next MFF could reach up to €132.2 billion. Energy efficiency remains a priority. The principle, energy efficiency first, should be taken seriously across the board. Improving the energy performance of buildings and speeding up renovation rates can be a game changer. The obstacles are well known, but we can explore new solutions, especially in financing. Good examples in local and social housing can be found in many member countries. I believe that we can become climate neutral and preserve the competitiveness of our economy and industries at the same time. There are quality jobs to be created in the clean energy technology sector if Europe is in the lead. I see smart integration of electricity, heating and cooling, transport and industry as crucial in order to meet our objectives. Finally, I will be attentive to energy prices and costs on consumers and businesses, and in particular to the impact that climate transition has on energy-intensive industries. I am a liberal who has always believed in individual freedoms without forgetting fairness. Climate transition will deeply affect many, and some more than others. I could quote statistics, but it is not just numbers. It is about real people, their lives, their stories. Entire sectors, families, villages, from Galicia to Silesia, will face a lot of changes around them. I know that firsthand because I come from Estonia, where oil shale is still widely used. The President-elect has committed to establish a just transition fund to support coal and carbon-intensive regions and islands affected by the transition, an idea first developed by Parliament. I'm sure Professor Puusek remembers that well. I see this fund as a way to enable regions to develop and finance concrete projects which can transform their economies and create jobs. We can build on the existing coal regions in transition initiative to make the fund a success. To me, fairness also means a renewed fight against energy poverty. It is not acceptable that 8% of the European population, this is 50 million people, is unable to properly heat their homes, and many more Europeans struggle to pay energy bills. I want to use the Energy Poverty Observatory and rapidly implement the legislative provisions on energy poverty. I intend to engage more with the Member States and the Covenant of Mayors. The report of Teresa Griffin presented last year has laid the groundwork for this. It is unthinkable that Europe can become climate neutral by 2050 without a colossal effort in research and innovation to develop new technologies. The EU is a research giant in the energy sector, second only to US. We are world leaders in number of energy patents, but our investments are not increasing fast enough. I will work with my colleague Maria Gabriel on how to use the New Horizon Europe as a catalyst for more public and private investment. The Strategic Energy Technology Plan has a potential we need to use to the maximum. I intend to develop an agenda for greater digitalization of the energy sector, covering the implementation of the digital single market and the clean energy package rules on smart grids, data access, and interoperability, but also aspects like artificial intelligence and cybersecurity. Europe needs to push other major emitters to be more ambitious and consistent in implementing the Paris Agreement. I will use energy dialogues to open markets for our clean energy business and for our connectivity projects, and of course, to promote security of supply. It is also time to leverage the strength of our currency and have more energy contracts denominated in euro. Energy can contribute to stabilization in our neighborhood, for instance in Ukraine, where the trilateral gas dialogue with Russia should be continued in view of reaching an agreement by the end of this year. For many years, I was a member of the Estonian Parliament. Therefore, I intend to work very closely with the European Parliament, explaining what we are doing each time we have a new development. I will be available to you. I grew up in Estonia when Europe was a dream, an ideal, a hope for change and freedom. I believe in Europe. I am ready to do my part in a Europe that strives for more with determination, but also with humility. If I can count on your support, I am certain that together we can build a Europe that leads the way in climate action and energy policy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Simson. Now it's time for the questions from the members of ITRE and the committee. I remind you 5 minutes for the question, 1 for the question, 2 for the answer, 1 for the follow-up, 1 for the reply. I will be strict with the time. The first speaker is Mr. Jerzy Buzek, ITRE EPP.
Very much, Madam Chair. Thank you for your speech, Madam Commissioner-designate. Last 5 years, we were very successful in enormous legislative efforts towards completing our energy union. Now is our first task, goal, fully and without delay implementation of the legislative fails. And energy transition will be even more important. Fair transition, just transition fund will be probably the most important slogans. I expect you to play a key role here. And my question is how to facilitate different investments in low-emission energy and district heating infrastructure, for example, from EU sources and private sources, such as sources like European Regional Development Fund or European Investment Bank funds. And how will you ensure that we use full potential of gas in our energy transition?
Thank you. Madam Simson.
Thank you, Professor Buzek, for a question. And before I will give you an answer, please allow me to stress once more the importance that ITRE committee, and you especially, had during the previous negotiations over clean energy package. So I can only confirm that this work that has been done lays a very good groundwork, and we can build on it. So you asked about the future financing, and this is indeed very true, that if we will raise our targets, then the biggest obstacle is financing, especially for energy efficiency projects. At the same time, we all know that ongoing negotiations about next MFF are mainstreaming climate investments. And for that reason, we can expect that there will be more funds available for projects that will provide energy efficiency, for projects that will cover renewables, and also networks. There is ongoing analysis going on in European Investment Bank about future lending procedures, and I think that it is very good that European Investment Bank, part of it, will become climate bank, that gives additional funds for needed investments. And I can promise you that I will very closely cooperate with Commissioner Gentiloni and also reach out to European Investment Bank so that their new lending criteria will be in accordance with our climate targets and European principles. Thank you.
Thank you. Follow-up question, Mr. Buzek.
Thank you, Madam. Let me say, district heating is very important from this point of view, also individual heating. And my question is continuously on the gas sector, because we've got our gas directive revision. Last term in office, we finished everything. And it's about implementation of EU law on the EU territory for improving competition in gas sector to give us a new impulse in this regard. And I would like to ask you if you are ready to fully implement gas directive revision despite of protest of Russia, because we know very well the protests now, because it could be very helpful, generally speaking, also from the heating, district heating, individual heating in at least 15 member states.
Thank you. Madam Simson.
Thank you, Professor Buzek. You very correctly mentioned that gas is an important tool for our transition period. It is extremely important right now for district heating, and it will stay so because it might be the most cost-efficient option for replacing coal-based power plants or district heating facilities. At the same time, we have to keep in mind that the future energy sources, they have to be diversified. And if we are talking about gas, then in near future we are not talking especially about natural gas anymore, but more and more about biogases and hydrogen that can help us for sector coupling. If we are keeping in mind, for example, heating and cooling or energy usage in industry or in transport. So there will be, yes, thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker is Mr. Zorinho. He is a member of S&D ITRE.
Signora.
Madam Commissioner-designate, you've described aspects of the economy, and all those who know about the economy, we cannot forget the impact on jobs, and we can't close our eyes to those impacts and the social consequences of an energy transition. And that's why a just and fair energy transition has been and continues to be a priority for the Socialists and Democrats in this Parliament. And that's why we need a commitment from you that it's a commitment for you, for the Commission. We're very glad to hear your comments in the opening remarks. The Fund for a Just Transition needs to be a robust one, and Elisa Ferreira will no doubt play a role in this process as well. So can you tell us how you expect to support Elisa Ferreira in her tasks and objectives? The Just Transition and the Fund for a Just Transition needs to be, should it be a stand-alone policy, or will it be part of a bigger plan to guide this transition in a responsible and just way? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Zorrinho, for the question. And Just Transition Fund will be indeed very close to my heart, because this is the tool that we can use to secure that during our transition towards carbon neutrality, no region, no country will be left behind. And as a tool, I do see that it will be helpful for coal and other solid fossil fuels regions, and also for small islands who don't have interconnections towards mainland. So it should be directed towards these regions, but keeping in mind that these regions are very different, so there is no unified solution for every region. But these strategies, how to be better prepared for phasing out coal, will be tailor-made individual strategy for each region, each member country. I know that this Just Transition Fund will be proposed by Commissioner Ferreira, but it shouldn't be only the fund that uses existing possibilities, but it should also use the support of member countries and bring additional private funding. So the biggest plus to this fund is that this will be operational before the phasing out period. So it will provide regions and people in these regions a future plan. So it is helping them before the loss of mining jobs, and helps them to create new opportunities. So, thank you.
You may finish your sentence. It's just an indication that you are out of time. Yes, a follow-up question, Mr. Zorrinho.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam Commissioner. Well, without a doubt, a just transition needs to be about bringing together and including the regions that depend on the extraction of polluting forms of energy. But it shouldn't be just about convergence. It should be useful to all Europeans. It should be promoting an energy transition across the Union, not just a convergence fund. So it's difficult to put this down in numbers, but I wonder exactly how high your ambitions are. What is the level of your ambition? When it comes to new policies, they need to be matched with new funding as well. The European Parliament has 4.8 million allocated to this fund. Do you think that this is adequate to be able to cover the challenges that we face? And will it be able to fund? Now we know that the funding will be complemented with loans as well, but I wanted to know a bit about the ambition that you have for this fund.
Madam Simson.
Thank you. Well, I do believe that this Just Transition Fund is a concrete measure to help those regions who will be most closely affected by the phase out of coal mining and phase out of fossil fuels. At the same time, if we are talking about overall consumers, then there are different measures how we can bring more competitive price and affordable price, and this is definitely an important part of decarbonization process, that energy prices are affordable and that the sources will be secure. But for reaching that, we can see that locally produced renewables don't have to be more expensive than fossil fuels that are coming with very volatile prices. We can also see future investments that will afford local communities to take care about their energy production, and most important, energy efficiency, so that consumers will need to spend less energy than right now. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker is Mr. Petersen. He is member Renew ITRE.
I'll speak in Danish. Lad mig starte med.
Can I start by thanking you for the very comprehensive written replies that we received in this committee. I think it was very interesting to read them. I have a question on sustainable energy. If we're to have climate neutrality in Europe by 2050, then the sustainable energy, or renewable energy rather, needs to play a better role than it does at the moment. We're not going to achieve the goals unless we get renewables playing a better role. The price for wind energy and solar energy has dropped significantly over the last years, which means we can do that without subsidies to a great extent. And that's perhaps one of the big revolutions. So if we really focus on it, renewables can play a major role in the green transition. We have some of the best wind energy in the world. We can compete with the sheiks in the Middle East if we really focus on it. But we're going to have to use the wind parks at sea more, 5 times more than we do at the moment. So how will you, as a commissioner, extend the use of wind energy in the North Sea in particular?
Thank you. Madam Simson.
Thank you, Mr. Petersen, for your question. And I do agree that we need more capabilities for renewables. And if we keep in mind that these new facilities have to come with a public acceptance, then definitely it is so that offshore wind parks tend to be more acceptable than onshore wind parks, especially keeping in mind that best locations for onshore wind facilities are already taken. So we see the need for close cooperation between different member countries for building new offshore facilities. And for that, there will be a cooperation mechanism in the future that several member countries together can build renewable facilities, either offshore wind parks or solar facilities, and we call it inside cooperation mechanism. This will be renewables window in Connecting Europe facility. And the other option for cooperation is future auctioning mechanism, where one hosting nation can provide so-called statistical transfer operations for those who don't have so favorable environmental conditions. This kind of mechanism already works. 2 years ago, Estonia was among the first ones, together with Lithuania, who used this statistical transfer, and we helped Luxembourg to fulfill their targets. But now it will be in more advanced basis. Thank you.
Thank you. And the follow-up question, Mr. Peterson.
Ja, tak for det. Og
Thank you very much. And thank you for that excellent reply. It's absolutely essential that we have financing mechanism in place if we're to achieve the ambitions we've set, and if we're to combat climate change, and if we're to use more wind parks at sea. So how will you and the Commission ensure that the relevant financing is in place? You talk about the Connecting Europe facility, which we negotiated before the elections, and where 15% is to be devoted to cross-border cooperation on energy. So how are you going to work for regional cooperation, such as the North Sea and the Baltic? How will you make sure that that will be considered for this financing? And I'd also like you to extend your answer to Mr. Busek's questions on the loan. How can we ensure that we can better combat climate change and support green development? Thank you.
Madam Simson.
Thank you for the question. I think that renewables and this kind of future projects, they need different kind of financing. So partly they can be financed from CEF funds, but because they might be very large-scale projects, they need also a co-financing from either from private banks or European Investment Bank that becomes partly climate bank. And at the same time, we have to keep in mind that the technology has become cheaper during the past decade, and these projects soon can be competitive against market prices. So there is a chance that they don't need any kind of additional support schemes. But this renewable window is especially created and designed for promoting the cooperation, cross-border cooperation between different member countries, so that not each of us will invest into our own territory, if it's wiser to do it together. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker is Mr. Niinisto, representing the Greens, ITRE.
Madam Chair, the climate emergency is the most important challenge and an existential threat that we have to tackle in our lifetime. And in your written answers, you commit yourself to the 2050 decarbonization goal and to the increased ambition level for 2030, which is good. However, we are worried about your climate credentials, since your party rejected to commit Estonia to the net zero carbon strategy by 2050 as you were in government, and you have also been a supporter of the oil shale industry in your country, one of the dirtiest energy sources. The Estonian government is currently planning to subsidize a €1 billion investment in shale oil due to be approved by the new Commission. And also during the Estonian Council presidency, you forged a continuation of subsidies to the polluting power plants. So with this background, how will you ensure that all member states are for an ambitious climate policy, won't invest in fossil infrastructure, and how you show that you are personally committed to these targets?
Thank you. Mrs. Simson.
Thank you for your question. Well, as I mentioned already in my opening remarks, I was minister in the Estonian government responsible for energy, and during that period we adopted long-term energy action plan that stated that our greenhouse gas emission will be reduced by 70% by 2030, by 70%. And parallelly, we had long-term climate plan that set the target that we will be reducing greenhouse gas by 80% by 2050. So that all happened 2 years ago, and then it was pretty ambitious. So that's true that in the beginning of this year, we still had this parliamentary level decision. By now, Our services have made impact assessment. They know what should be done and how much it will cost to be able to reach climate neutrality by 2050. And I know that in this week, actually, in Estonia, they are deciding it also, discussing it also at the government level. So I can say you that I will commit 100% towards this ambition, and I do believe that if Estonian government will commit, then they will deliver too, like they have done with current targets and targets for 2030. Estonia belongs to a green growth group and has been always very ambitious. Thank you.
Follow-up question, Mr. Niinisto.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for your commitment on that, but you didn't answer the question on subsidies for fossil infrastructure. I would like to have an answer for that as well. And then when it comes to the 2030 target, von der Leyen has committed to increase EU's climate target to 50 to 55%, which is actually not still in line with the Paris ambition, so there's a lot to be done. And when it comes to renewables and efficiency, energy efficiency, the current member states' programs don't even add up to the current targets. So there's a lot to be done, and it's a big possibility for European industrial renewal as well, that we will actually, as part of the Green Deal, have an ambitious program to invest in renewables and energy efficiency. But that means that there needs to be a review of the energy efficiency and renewables targets for 2030, and also that the Commission will actively address the gap between EU targets and ambition of member states. So how will you promote these goals in concrete measures? You don't say concrete measures in your written answers.
Thank you. Madam Simson.
Thank you, and yes, I have to come back to the first question about oil shale. This has been historically Estonian source of energy, and now when ETS is operational, the high CO2 prices are making it not compatible against market prices. So we already see that the production of energy out of oil shale is declining. And instead of that, we are importing Nordic energy, nuclear from Finland, but also from Russia, coal-based energy. And of course, we are replacing it with renewables. So about targets, I do believe that if we will take seriously the implementation of current network, then energy sector is able to deliver that was promised, and then we have to agree on next steps how we will raise the targets. And as you very correctly said, President-elect has promised 50% and in responsible pay towards 55. So I commit myself with the same promise.
Thank you. Next speaker is Mr. Buchheit, ID ITRE.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, Mrs. Simpson here. In the middle. Frau Simpson, mit einem...
Ms. Simpson, the action plan on funding sustainable development was how the Commission was ushering in sustainable financing. That was in March 2018, and the initiative actually came into this Parliament in 2019, in March, 1 year later. And the market imbalances would be caused by this, and in the private sector would be struggling. And it's in fact the private market that would be coming up with the lion's share of the funding for this plan in order to promote energy policies and transitions in the European Union. Ms. Simpson, what's your assessment of the situation whereby the private economy, private sector is being drawn into funding these policies, and how is that compatible with free marketeering?
Thank you. Mrs. Simpson.
Thank you for your question. I do believe that towards our climate targets, everyone has to give his or her input, and also our private sector can benefit from phasing out fossil fuels, and definitely can benefit from the future research and innovation, because if Europe will be in the leading position, then more innovation will bring us new jobs, growth, and raise our competitiveness. At the same time, if we commit for the climate targets, we have to be sure that we will do it in cost-effective way, so that in every moment our energy sources will be secured. There can't be any threat to our energy security. Our energy prices should stay affordable. It is not possible that energy bills will raise in immense way. And if we secure those basic assumptions, then I can say that it is possible to reach our climate goals. Thank you.
Thank you. Follow-up question, Mr. Buchheit.
Ja, das ging nicht genau.
Well, that wasn't an answer to my question precisely. Let me try to be more precise.
Fossil fuels, ja, das ist nicht in.
It's not about private sectors benefiting from fossil fuels being phased out, but it's this package and other packages asking industry to support policies that are in sectors where there are major transitions occurring, and surely that's going to have an impact on energy prices because of the transition.
Madam Simson.
Well, this is a question for the European Union, that our energy prices should stay competitive, and to achieve that, we can do several things. For example, we can support the investments into grids, and not leave all those investments for consumers. And we can do more for open and competitive market. If there are many providers, then the prices should be more affordable for consumers and enterprises. And if our markets are interconnected, and they are not yet, there are missing links and bottlenecks, but if they are interconnected, then this helps to provide renewable energy for larger markets. And this was the main goal of the Green Energy Package, that consumers will be in the heart of the energy market, and the price will stay affordable. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now the next speaker is Mr. Krasnodebski from ECR.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Madam Commissioner-designate. In its recent ruling on Opal gas pipeline, the European Court of Justice for the first time referred to the principle of energy solidarity. And this principle of energy solidarity and security is, as we know, part of treaty law under Article 194 of the Treaty of European Union, a function of European Union. And I would like to ask you about your view on further applicability of this principle. As a future commissioner, will you support the idea of obligatory stress tests of the impact on the security of supply applicable to each new energy infrastructure project? Do you intend to develop clear criteria and indicators that would help assess whether the principle of energy solidarity is met each case? Or will the European Commission propose clear criteria to assess when there is a negative impact on security of supply in line with gas directive?
Thank you very much. Madam Simson.
Thank you, Mr. Krasnodebski, for the question. And yes, this is very important that in the context of gas, we are taking very seriously the solidarity aspect. And as you very correctly mentioned in this previous Opal case, that was the court ruling that we have to keep in mind, also solidarity aspect. And I do believe that if we are talking about future gas market setup, then this is the main pillar where we can build on. So talking about gas, we have to also keep in mind that that it is very important to diversify the different sources. And in that point of view, Poland, the state where you are coming, is doing pretty well. You have LNG terminal, you have Kipl with Lithuania, and you will have gas pipeline towards Norway. So 3 different sources, and this is the situation which many member countries are still aiming for. Thank you.
You still have time if you wish. You still have time if you wish. Mr. Krasnodebski, you want to put a follow-up question?
Okay, follow-up question. Slightly more general, because we are talking about what is for us very important, transition to climate-neutral economy, but how you can ensure the consistency of the transition to this kind of economy is the principle of technology neutrality and guaranteed by the treaties respect for the right of each member state to determine its own energy mix.
Thank you. Madam Simson.
So if I understood this follow-up question correctly, then you asked about the future perspective of investments, gas investments. And yes, it is correct that the mixture of the energy mix is poorly decided by each member country. And we do know that, that in the transition period, there are the percentage of gas as energy source will not decrease significantly because several member countries will replace coal with gas. But at the same time, if we are talking about future investments, we have to keep in mind that these investments into gas network should be future-proof. And with future-proof, I mean that there are other gases than natural gas that do have smaller environmental footprint. We should invest more into hydrogen and biogases, and these networks should be future-proof in the meaning that they would be useful also beyond 2030. But until we are in the transition period, the gas networks and interconnections will be financed. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker is Mr. Botenga, GUE.
Oui, bonjour, merci.
Good morning. I'm going to get down to brass tacks here. In your mission letter, Ms. von der Leyen says that you're to use liquid natural gas to the greatest possible extent, and something you mentioned before. So let me be very concrete. What measures are you intending to do? Are you going to invest in gas infrastructure? Are you going to have a very strong position to promote gas from a financial point of view? And when it comes to taxation of energy, you contributed to that directive, and it lays down the minimum taxation for fuels and electricity. I'm wondering whether you're going to use that to reduce emissions, and what particular fuel will you target and how?
Thank you. Madam Simson.
Thank you. There is indeed a paragraph in my mission letter about promoting LNG, and I do see it as a way of securing our energy security, that our gas supplies will come from diversified sources and to different parts of European Union. And that means that there will be investments for accommodating those routes. And there are ongoing investments right now in Kruk in Croatia, and also extensions in Baltic Sea LNG terminal in Poland. About energy taxation, this is also mentioned in my mission letter, and I will closely cooperate with Commissioner Gentiloni about that. It is true that energy taxation directive that is already 15 years old doesn't help us in the way it could to reach our energy and climate targets. And especially I do believe that the difficulty is that it still allows tax exemptions in some ways for fossil fuels. That makes the competition between fossil fuels and renewables difficult, and we should address this issue. And if you asked me what kind of tax proposals I will propose, then of course they will be according to our energy and climate targets, and they will be towards renewables, to promoting renewables competitiveness. Thank you.
Thank you. This is our follow-up question, Mr. Botenga.
Oui, merci.
Yes, thank you very much. I've been listening to you, but I'm scared that the message of the Gilets jaunes and the young people fighting for our climate hasn't been heard. So first of all, it's clear that the young people are asking for investment in renewable energy. And if they're asking for €1, you can't spend it twice. And if you're spending it on gas, even if it's less polluting than coal, you're not spending it on renewable energy. So I want a firm commitment, because in the past there wasn't a firm commitment to renewable energies and favoring them over polluting oil and gas. Now, I fear that it will be the people, the working classes, that will pay for this. So what about the social dimension? Can you guarantee that it won't be the people that will foot the bill?
Madam Simson.
Thank you, Mr. Botenga, and I can assure you that the message of young people is very well heard, and the action plan to fulfill their expectations will be there. Yes, we need a significant raise of investments into renewables, and there are different ways how we can achieve it. One of these will be EU funds. I already mentioned CEF, Horizon Europe, LIFE program. Another option is to blend private money, and to blend it with loans, and there will be a certain scheme which is also part of the Vice President Dombrovskis' task. And I do believe that for future investments, the European Investment Bank that becomes Climate Bank can play a major role. But altogether, there will be, even in EU next multi-annual financial framework, there will be almost twice as many resources for energy, research and creeds than it was in previous one. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I just want to draw your attention on the fact that we are very delayed. So let's try to keep the time as it was agreed at the beginning. Now we start the second round of speakers. The first one is Mr. Gürk, ITRE EPP.
Thank you, Commissioner-designate. We all share the ambitions targeting climate neutrality of the EU. However, it needs to be understood that the successful implementation depends on support of public. To ensure the citizens of our countries need to have full information on the process and guarantees that no one will be left behind or put at risks. Therefore, I'd like to ask you some concrete questions. What quantifiable analysis can you provide and when regarding the feasibility of the target date of 2050? How much time does the Commission need to make a thorough impact assessment that leaves no region and no one behind? How can you guarantee that this plan does not lead to an explosion of consumer energy prices and does not harm security of supply and competitiveness of member states? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Simson.
Thank you, Mr. Gürk, for your question. And indeed, this has been a great concern for many MEPs and, of course, member states, that the cost of transition should be just, and especially when you keep in mind that member states are not in the same starting position. There are member states who are still dependent on fossil fuels, and member states who are in different page. You asked me what will be the concrete plan for 2050 targets, and I can tell you that that I will closely cooperate with Executive Vice President Frans Timmermans, who is the commissioner who will bring who will provide the climate law. Before he can do so, there has to be thorough impact assessment, and we will have a comprehensive plan how we will reach to 2050 targets by 2021. Me, as a responsible for energy, I have to assure that parallelly to those ambitious climate targets, we secure our consumers and our businesses with affordable and competitive energy. And for that, we have to invest into our energy networks. But at the same time, we have to take use of the current existing framework. So I have had no chance to talk about internal market and the benefits that it can bring, but I hope that I will have the chance later on. Thank you.
Follow-up question, Mr. Gürk.
Thank you. You've mentioned the principle of technology neutrality in your answers here and in your written answers as well, and I agree with this. In this context, I like to underline that in the Central European region, the deployment of nuclear power is indispensable to eliminate carbon emissions and shelter citizens from supply and price risks. Do you agree with the assessment of the International Energy Agency that without additional nuclear, the clean energy transition becomes significantly more difficult and more expensive? what role would you like to devote to nuclear energy in the new sustainable investment plan? Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Simpson.
Thank you for the question. Nuclear power will be part of the energy mix, and the energy mix is decided by each member state. So I know that right now we have countries who are phasing out their nuclear power, and there are member states who are planning to build new ones to replace phasing out coal power plants. And there is Finland, which has opened a new Olkiluoto power plant. So this is a decision by every individual member state. How will they use their energy mix, and what will be the sources? At the EU level, we have to secure that nuclear power plants are safe, that the waste management is safe for our environment, and not only inside the European Union, but also in our close neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker is Mr. Fuglesang, SND.
Thank you very much. I'm on the front row. Commissioner-designate, thank you for your good words. I would like to go in a direction which is a bit more concrete when it comes to renewable energy targets. According to your written replies, you will assess whether to review the existing legislation in the energy field in order to reach the goal of 55% emission reduction in 2030. Does the Commissioner-designate agree with the various experts and NGOs stating that we need a considerable higher target than the current 32% renewable energy target for 2030, that we need actually much more renewable energy going up towards 45%? Does the Commissioner-designate agree with that?
Madam Simpson.
Thank you, Mr. Fuglesang, for your question. And about renewables, well, those targets for 2030 were just negotiated. And right now we are in this situation that after 3 months, by the end of this year, member states should provide their first national energy and climate plans, where they give us exact plan how they will reach their goals. So I know that despite the fact that many member states are still working to fulfill those set targets, there are many who have already promised that they will voluntarily raise their targets. Last week on Tuesday there was an Energy Council, and several member countries announced that in state level they have already made decisions to aim for higher percentages than were agreed under this clean energy package. We should also make possible for those member countries who don't have favorable environmental conditions, that they can cooperate with others to achieve higher tasks, and this kind of cooperation mechanism will be there. Thank you.
Follow-up question, Mr. Fuglesang.
Thank you very much, and I'm happy that member states renew their targets and some of them increase the ambition level. I'm not sure I got an answer if you agree that we need to increase the ambition level, that we need concretely to raise the 32% target in 2030 to a higher number. And if you, yes or no, will propose that, will open the Renewable Energy Directive and propose a higher target for 2030, yes or no? Thank you.
Mrs. Simson.
Thank you. I'm coming from Estonia. Our aim is that by 2020 we will reach 32% for renewables. And then if we are talking about 2030, it will be already 42, 43. So I think that it is possible to reach higher targets, but at the same time, we have to do also more to accommodate renewables. So we have to invest into research and innovation for providing storage for renewables. We have to work at first in regional level for creating internal market so that the renewables will reach to the broader market. And these actions are also very important. And I will come back to this cooperation mechanism again, that we should promote this cooperation mechanism, that member states can invest into facilities, either solar facilities or offshore wind parks, even if they are built not in their own territories. Thank you.
Thank you. Madame Gamon, Renew.
Thank you very much for the strong commitment that you have given us, not only in your written answers, but also today on achieving the climate goals in the European Union. We at Renew Europe, we believe that we must do our utmost to achieve these goals, but that there is also the necessity to achieve them in time, because we are running out of time. And you will be at the center of these efforts, particularly when it comes to facilitating renewable energy projects in the entire European Union. And these sources of energy are, for instance, hydropower or wind energy, that are both subject to other different regulatory frameworks where other commissioners are also responsible for them. What do you plan to do to unlock the full potential that we have in the European Union for renewable energy sources such as hydropower and wind energy? And what will you do working together with other DGs to ensure that these different regulatory frameworks as a whole are smart, future-proof and sustainable and stimulative also? And how do you think can we prioritize this further?
Madam Simpson.
Thank you for the question. Yes, we need more renewable facilities to fulfill our targets, and we need even more investment if we are raising our targets. And at the same time, we have to keep in mind that there are certain restrictions. They may be environmental restrictions. There are also problems with public acceptance. At the same time, there are things that we can do and that we will do. For example, for planning processes, member states are asked under the Renewable Energy Directive to streamline permitting procedures so that planning and building will not take so long as it tends to be. And this is, of course, accordance to all the environmental evaluations. At the same time, there are limits of space, and we have to work closely together with commissioners who are responsible for land use, for example, or if we are talking about renewables that are coming from biomass, then about growth rates, annual growth rates. And if we are talking about hydropower plants, then definitely I have to cooperate with a commissioner who will be responsible for fisheries. But it is also so that something has been done, and there are guidelines about hydro renewables adopted already last year. Thank you.
Follow-up question, Madam Gamon.
Thank you very much. I think you've shown that you know that there's a lot of responsibility in your hands in coordinating these different efforts. What will you do to really help member states achieve or facilitate and to build these projects, finish these projects in time so that we can, as the entire European Union, achieve our climate goals? Because as you have mentioned, some of these projects face massive time delays and increases in costs, which of course make it difficult for renewable energy to also be cost effective. But is there anything else that you would want to add, how we can help each and every member state to achieve these goals?
Madam Simson.
This is actually a very important notice that many of the targets have not been met or they are late. And if you are talking about renewable targets from 2020, then there are two reasons why there is a chance that the renewable targets will not be met. One of them that some initiatives are delayed, implementation is delayed, and another one is that measures were too positively calculated. So now, because of the governance regulation, we will have comparable data about each and every member country. So annually we will get reports what have been done, and we can closely cooperate to help them to keep their timelines. And these reports will also be available for European Parliament. So there will be a State of Energy Union report each year in October, and this kind of close monitoring should bring us a situation that initiatives are not delayed. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker is actually the only ENVI speaker in this hearing, is Mr. Peter Liese, EPP ENVI.
I would like to come back to the issue of climate neutrality. Estonia was against in the summit, and that had, of course, consequences. In New York, the European Union could not really commit to the climate neutrality. And I would like to understand your personal role on that. So you explained the government's position, but what was your personal position before the summit in June? And you spoke about some analysis that your government had to do. Does that mean that you didn't trust the analysis of the current Energy Commissioner, Miguel Arias-Cañete? Because already in November, the Commission really did an analysis, and the question is, didn't you trust in your capacity as a minister? And I would like to remind you that you didn't really answer the question of Jerzy Buzek on the Russian intervention in the gas case.
Thank you. Madam Simson.
Thank you, Mr. Liese. Since last parliamentary elections in Estonia this March, I have been member of parliament. So in June, I wasn't anymore minister responsible for energy. I was member of Estonian parliament. But as I explained earlier, Estonia has been very ambitious and very devoted into climate plans. So 2 years ago, when we adopted our long-term climate action plan, we actually assessed all the possibilities, what we can do, how much will it cost. And we adopted a very ambitious climate plan, if you take it at that moment, 2017. And it went through Parliament. So basically, according to our regulation, we need also a Parliament-level decision to change it. It was there was a declaration that we will lower greenhouse gases by 80%. By now, there has been impact assessment. Our current government has created a climate council. 7 key ministers are members of this Climate Council, and they discussed this possibility that we will be climate neutral exactly this week. According to my knowledge, there is an action plan how we can achieve it, and by December, when the European Council will decide that, I think that there will be unanimity. This is possible, and all the member states can benefit if Europe will be in lead for that question. Thank you.
Follow-up.
Thank you for that answer, but it doesn't answer the question, what was your personal position? You were not minister, but you were member of the parliament, and we had a proposal from the European Commission. This parliament said the Council should commit to climate neutrality already in May, and in June still Estonia was against. So did you support the idea of climate neutrality in your capacity as a member of the parliament, or were you part of a majority that said Estonia cannot commit?
Madam Simson.
Thank you. According to my best knowledge, this question didn't come to the plenary hall in Estonian Parliament. So it was dealt in a special European Affairs Committee, and the position of Estonia wasn't against. Estonia just needed more time for our procedures, and one of those was the impact assessment. What will we do to be ready to be climate neutral by 2050? And now, if you compare us with other countries, I do believe that we have already, advantage. We know what we have to do, and among one of those things is that our oil shale production, there is a special region in Estonia, is under big changes. So if you need my personal commitment, then yes, I do support climate neutrality. I think that this is a wise thing if we want to achieve this 1.5 Celsius by decrease, and there has been just to conclude, during my mandate, this mandate in the Estonian Parliament, there was no such a vote. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next speaker is Madame Kutahar, SND.
Madam Simson, the recent attacks on Saudi oil refineries have shown once again how delicate the international market is to the stability of Europe's energy and how fragile the security of supply is. A lot has been done to diversify energy of supply from third countries, like for instance with LNG, mainly to be less dependent from big gas producers like Russia. However, the paradox is that as prices for oil rise, the EU could see its dependency from Russian oil increasing. So diversifying supplies from another source, whilst alleviating the dependency, might not totally solve the underlying problem. Energy of supply policy needs to speak about other aspects of the energy union, in particular our overarching goal of a carbon-neutral economy. What concrete measures will you propose during your mandate to make the security of supply compatible with such other dimensions, in particular with the decarbonization of the energy system?
Madam Simson.
Thank you. This is true that Europe has been very dependent on energy import. We are importing gas and oil, and this will stay so also during our transition period. At the same time, we have to keep in mind that this is one of our principles, that our energy should come from secure. Our energy security has to be protected, and for that reason we have to diversify both our energy sources and our energy routes. Here were previously questions about our investments into gas infrastructure and why will we do so if there is a lack of investments also for renewables. But I do see that some of the investments into gas infrastructure, both for interconnections and for LNG terminals, are part of our energy security. And the situation where routes will be even more concentrated into the Baltic Sea, and where main supplier will get bigger share, are not in accordance of our energy policy. Thank you.
Follow-up?
Apart from ensuring that we're not dependent on certain sources, I was asking specifically about concrete measures regarding other dimensions, such as decarbonization of the energy system. And I would like to ask you that once again, and linking with energy security, there are other new modern threats other than the classical dependency. And, for example, we can speak about cybersecurity of the grids, which could also be state-driven, or ensuring the resilience of infrastructure to climate change. What will be your initiatives in this area? Are these dimensions on top of your agenda? And all in all, when in 20 years, Europeans will look back on your 5 years as Energy Commissioner, what will be your legacy on energy security? Thank you.
Madam Simson.
Thank you. We have to keep in mind that different energy sources are not coming for nothing. So I do believe that certain investments should be done, especially into the research and innovation. So if we are talking about gas right now, then we tend to talk about natural gas. Hydrogen is not compatible against other energy sources. And if we're talking about hydrogen right now, then 95% of it comes from natural gas, only 5% of hydrogen comes from renewables. So research towards hydrogen will be one of the research priorities. Also, there is a need for research and innovation for storage, because bigger amount of renewables needs also new options for storage and transportation. Thank you.
Thank you. Remind yourself to put the bulk of questions in the first one, so that the Commissioner, if she gets too many questions for the follow-up, then of course in 1 minute it's very difficult to answer to all the topics. So maybe as a suggestion, try to put the most lengthy one in the first question. Now the next speaker is Mr. Rope.
Thank you, Chair. I'm sitting here. Dear candidate to the commissioners, next to the EU frontier, a Belarus nuclear power plant is being constructed with the funds of Russia. It violates all international conventions. Belarus ignores EU stress tests and their results because they revealed clear problems in the structure of the plant, and they have to be solved before the beginning of the operation of the plant. Belarus is trying to operate the plant with major faults. What specific actions you, as a new commissioner, are planning to take to avoid a new Chernobyl catastrophe next to the EU border? The security tests in Chernobyl were carried out after the reactor started functioning. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Robe, for your question. And I do know that the building process of Ostrovets power plant, nuclear power plant, is a very important political question for all the Lithuanians. And it is built very close to your capital. So what can we do with new sites of nuclear power plants that are built in third countries? We can provide assistance so that the building and maintenance will take place under the highest security standards. We can provide also financial assistance to the sites in third countries so that these procedures are made. And of course, we can insist that all the stress test results will be taken very seriously. So Ostrovets nuclear power plant will be operational, but we will provide guidance how to fulfill all the security requirements in the way, in the highest security, according to the highest security standards. At the same time, European Union will provide also support to Lithuania to be ready for possible emergency cases. Thank you.
Follow-up? Mr. Rope?
Yes, thank you for your reply. I wanted a more specific reply, but it's enough. It's a public secret that the Belarus power plant will generate electricity for the EU market. Lithuania is located very close to the power plant and has already declared that it will not allow the import of that electricity to its plant because it does not satisfy the security standards. What is going to happen with other member states? What about other neighboring countries, including your homeland, Estonia? Will you not import that cheap electricity? Will you take any steps in future so that the European Commission would ensure a ban of import of electricity that does not satisfy security standards? Thank you.
Simson.
Thank you, Mr. Robe. As you very well know, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania are together in our energy policy, and I had very good cooperation with your energy minister. So right now, three of us, we still belong to the BRELL synchronous area. So BRELL, it means for Belarus, Russia, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania. And we are working closely to get synchronized towards continental Europe. This synchronization process should be ready by 2025. There is a positive way forward for us. At the same time, the problem of cross-border electricity trade is not only about nuclear power plants, but also these kind of power plants that use coal but don't pay CO2 price, and that's why they have competitive advantages compared to European power plants. So this is a question we have to look closely at, how this kind of competition influences our markets. Thank you.
Thank you. Now Mr. Borkia, ITRA-ID.
Thank you. Certainly, the EU should strive towards a renewable-based economy according to the targets set by the Clean Energy Package. However, as the Commissioner-designate acknowledged, natural gas is still an important player in everyday life of European citizens. Yet, there seems to be no clear regulation concerning the integration of the European gas market. Member states, such as Italy, are still dependent on energy imports, not only from third countries, but also from other member states. The high cost of imported energy are affecting heavily the ability of Italian SMEs to be competitive in comparison with fellow European businesses, which can rely on lower national energy prices. How do you plan to ensure that national gas policies of member states do not go against the rules of fair competition?
Madam Simson.
Thank you for the question. There are European level agreements how we will open our markets towards cross-border trade, and in that case, the achievement that was in that case, the Clean Energy Package shows us a way how it's possible to solve market restrictions in energy market. So I do know that there is a clear expectation that some of the elements that were achieved in electricity market will be mirrored to gas market too. And especially there is an expectation that also in gas market we should empower consumers, that they will have rights that electricity consumers already have, and I think that this is a good idea. Thank you.
Follow-up.
Transition to the carbonized economy will have a social and economic impact not only in some specific territories of the Union, but in every member state. Will the Commission introduce support instruments for every national system affected by transition, or will it limit support to some specific areas? And you mentioned that gas infrastructure should be maintained and agree with this view. How do you evaluate the decision of the European Investment Bank to stop any funding related to gas infrastructure projects by the end of 2020? And do you believe that the internal gas market will be sustainable even in absence of EIB financial support? Thank you.
Madam Simson.
There will be several infrastructure projects that will be financed by CEF fund, and some of them will need also co-funding from EIB. So I hope that EIB will their lending policy will be in accordance to EU energy policy. You asked that what can we do that transition's social impact will be supportive. And I think that if we're talking about gas, then almost half of the heating depends on gas. And we have to keep in mind that energy efficiency is a very important tool, how we can lower the costs for our households. So one of the main investment target will be renovation of building stock, and not only some countries, but all around Europe, and especially for multi-apartment buildings. So there we can see significant energy savings and cost savings. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, Madam Stegrud, ECR.
Madam Chair and Madam Commissioner-designate, Mrs. Simpson, I'm sorry, I have a cold. I hope you can hear me anyway. I'm new in Parliament, but I have a background within the private sector and the energy industry. I've been working for many years with energy investments, different types of analysis, consumer behaviors, and so on. And when I read your instructions, where you have the goal to make, and I quote, to make sure that Europeans have access to affordable, secure, reliable, and clean energy. To my experience, I would say these goals are totally contradictory and very hard, and you will have to set priorities. And you have already answered a lot of questions on this theme, so I will actually put quite a different questions. Being a woman and from the energy industry, I read in your written answers that the share of women in the energy sector is on average 22% in the global oil and gas industry and 32% in renewable energy. And you're willing to work with this. And I wonder, what do you say about the reason to this, and why do you consider it a problem?
Madam Simson.
Thank you. Just a short comment about the assumption that affordable, secure, and clean energy is not possible. I do believe that it is, because renewable energy comes from local sources, and I know that, for example, where I do live, during certain seasons we will get a very cheap energy from Nordic hydropower plants, and this is definitely clean, affordable, and secure. Now, about women's role in energy sector, I do believe that in every sector we should remove burdens if they are there. And this is a very good example that in traditional energy sector there are not the difference between women and men are pretty obvious, but at clean energy sector, the new technologies, research, and innovation, there are more involvement also from both sexes. And this is one of the additional benefits to move towards renewables, according to my mind. Thank you.
Follow up.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, if everyone could have access to hydropower, we wouldn't have this problem at all, but that is not the case. So I think you will need to set your priorities. My question was, why do you consider it a problem? And what would you consider a good number? If it's 22% today, what would you say would be a fair and good number?
Madam Simson.
Yeah, yes. I don't set this kind of targets. If I'm talking about future numbers, then I think that for all of us it is very important how many new jobs will be created because of our targets towards climate neutrality, what kind of jobs these will be, which are new jobs. And in that perspective, I do believe that positions in industry, but also in research and innovation, are equally suitable for both sexes. So these kind of new jobs will be created if Europe will stay in the leading position for on our way to climate neutrality, and this is a thing we have to keep in mind. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, Mr. Kelly, EPP.
Okay. Good morning, Madam Simpson, and I hope you are comfortable in that Graham Norton-like chair. So, you indicated very rightly that Parliament played a huge role in getting a 32% target for renewable energy, and as a rapporteur for that, I know how hard we fought to achieve it. And also, you mentioned that Estonia are now going to have 42% by 2030, and I think even the Greens have to be impressed by that. One of the key aspects of the Renewable Energy Directive was to set out an enabling framework for citizens and communities to take control of their energy use and to participate in the transition to a low-carbon system. So the question is, what concrete initiatives will you take to facilitate the deployment of new business models and markets on a decentralised and more local level? And also, how will you further encourage and incentivise citizens and communities to manage their own energy consumption, switch to renewable sources and become the key beneficiaries of the energy transition? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Simpson.
Thank you for this question. And this was indeed part of plan that we will get more citizens' involvement via the way that they can themselves produce renewables. And it has been great help that solar panels prices, for example, solar panel prices have come down. So if we talk about solar PCs, these are 5 times less costly than they were a decade ago. I can give advices from the perspective, from the Estonian perspective, and I know that in Estonia we adopted a law that gives the micro producers very easy access to market. We call it plug and play, and this has created an immense growth of local mini solar panel energy producers. This is possible because we negotiated this distribution system operators. At first they were worried, but now it works very well. The market is very open, and of course it is possible because we have data hub that accommodates all the producers and consumers. So these kind of very convenient and comfortable ways how micro-producers can offer their products, energy, will help us to fulfill renewables targets. Thank you.
Thank you. Follow-up.
Thank you very much, Madam Simpson, for your very interesting answer. Now, you strike me as being a very practical, sensible lady, so you'll be aware that one of the great criticisms of the European Union is too much bureaucracy, too much red tape. So how are you going to ensure in any legislative proposal you put forward does not add to the complexity or further uncertainty to industry, SMEs and public authorities, but instead enable investments to flourish? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Madam Simson.
I think the clean energy package gives us already a framework, and we have to implement now those tools that are there and that are giving the possibility for all micro producers to provide their energy to the market. At the same time, there are also other aspects. For example, in energy efficiency field that demands that all the new buildings have to be very energy efficient, but they should produce also part of their future consumed energy by themselves. So these kind of instruments are already there. Just member states have to implement and make them accessible for all the stakeholders. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker is Mr. Pekkarinen from Renew.
Excuse me, in Finnish, please. Arvoisa puheenjohtaja.
Dear President, I would like to wish all the best for the new Commissioner. I have a lot of faith in your success in your future job. Now, the plans for energy efficiency, it is possible for us to reach an emissions reduction of 40% by 2030. However, this is still far away from 50% or 55%. Where should the emphasis be in future actions? In the emissions trade sector or in the burden sharing sector? You talked about renewables. What is your opinion on bioenergy, which is very important for us Finns amongst the renewables?
Madam Simson.
Thank you, Mr. Pekkarinen, for your question. And I was really tempted to give my answer also in Estonian because I was waiting for the possibility to use my native language. And seems that there is no one from Estonia who will ask question. But for the convenience, I will continue in English. So you asked how we will achieve the higher greenhouse gas emission, how we will achieve a higher percentage. And I do agree that energy sector has to play a very important role because right now 75% of the greenhouse gas emissions are coming either from energy production or consumption. But there are other sectors too who have to provide their support. And definitely this will be overarching topic for the next Commission. So even the structure of the next Commission, that there will be Executive Vice President for Green Deal, Mr. Frans Timmermans, and under him, or working together with him, different commissioners who are responsible for energy, transport, environment, rural affairs, and health, shows that this is our common goal. I know that Vice President Frans Timmermans will also look very closely to the extension of current ETS system. So there are sectors like building or transport that are not covered with this system yet, but definitely can have an input. From my point of view, I see the benefits of smart integration, that we can closely cooperate with different sectors and provide smaller carbon footprint for the sectors like transport, or of course industry, and building sector, heating and cooling. Thank you.
Thank you. Follow up.
Carbon sequestration technologies have not made as much progress as anticipated.
One possibility is decarbonization of carbon, that is, producing synthetic fuel from carbon dioxide by using electricity. We know that electricity storage is difficult, but when we have overproduction, we could convert carbon dioxide into methane, which could then be a way of storing carbon. Do you want to promote this kind of bold decarbonization projects?
Thank you. Madam Simson.
Thank you, Mr. Pekkarinen, and I really appreciate that you brought up this carbon capture and storage, or carbon capture and usage issue, because this will be definitely one of the technological mechanisms how we can achieve carbon neutrality by 2050. Right now in European Union, we don't have any existing project like this, but there are some flagship projects around the world. And I know that the closest for experimental project we are is in Rotterdam port, where they are planning carbon capture storage offshore, and if it will be funded, it might be there already by 2023. The reason why we don't have these kind of projects yet is, of course, the public awareness and there are some doubts about storing carbon, and of course changed targets. Thank you.
Next speaker, Mr. Corrao, non-affiliated, yeah.
Good morning, Madam Simpson. Bene, lei da commissario.
You are Commissioner-designate for Energy, and you face enormous challenges. First of all, high-intensive energy industry, which contribute greatly to CO2 emissions, then district heating and cooling of buildings that accounts for a huge share as well. And then building renovation is going too slowly. I'd like to know whether you're going to put forward a wide raft of push-pull measures, and how are you going to include the renovation of buildings in the circular economy? And then a question that is very close to my heart, and that is energy communities, a kind of democratization of energy, if you like. Citizens are becoming protagonists and not just merely consumers, with huge environmental advantages, of course. So what are you planning to do that concepts such as these are implemented and transposed properly? Thank you.
Madam Simson.
Thank you. Here were several questions, and I start from the beginning. So about district heating. Yes, this is one of the biggest obstacles that we should get more energy efficiency out of district heating. We can do it in several ways. One of the options is effective cogeneration. If we produce both heat and electricity, then already 10% of energy efficiency is granted. Also, using more bioenergy for heating is an option. Smart integration between sectors, or sector coupling, like they call it, new innovations for big heat pumps and so on. So all of this may bring down the district heating costs. But the biggest share is coming down if we can renovate our building stock. So approximately 75% of apartment buildings are inefficient. they need renovation. If we compare buildings that were built in the 80s with the buildings that are built today, then they use twice as much, they consume twice as much energy than new ones. So we can see that the savings are visible. But at the same time, we are missing funds for renovating in faster, to fasten the renovation. So what can we do? At first, we can share best practices. In some member states, they have discovered smart ways how to attract private investments, and these are useful for other countries too. Thank you.
Follow up, Mr. Corral.
Yes, I understand. I asked many questions on the first, so I will use also the time of the follow-up for asking you to answer the second questions, especially the one referring to the energetic communities. When I talk about the democratization of the energy sector, I'm referring to the chance that we have to use citizens as prosumers and not foreseeing only, the transition for the big energetic players that there are. So the question is, are you planning to use your DG and to use measures in order to go towards this democratization of the energy path?
Madam Simson.
Thank you for your question. Renewable Energy Directive already gives us those tools that consumers can also become producers. They can consume, they can store, they can sell energy, and this also involves this big share of population who do live in apartment buildings. So I do believe that this kind of micro production that you are consuming and you are producing, you named it prosumers, is very important to achieve our climate goals. This is also important to show that, that consumers can benefit from this transition, and we have to take usage also from all the newest innovation. So this might be also part of the renovation, mentioning the new innovation, European innovation, like solar tiles that both provide insulation and renewable energy. Thank you.
Next speaker, Mr. González Casares from S&D.
Thank you, Mr. Simpson. Thank you for your mention to Galicia at the beginning, and now I will continue in Spanish. Tenemos un objetivo
We have a 15% target for interconnection by 2030. Interconnection improves efficiency and transmitting renewable energy from one place to the next. In the Iberian Peninsula, interconnection with the rest of Europe is 2.8% only. So if our target is 15%, and in some areas the rate is only 2.8%, then it's very difficult to achieve that target at the moment. What specific measures and what kind of schedule do you propose to make sure that this 15% interconnection target across the EU by 2030 will be put forward by the Commission? And also, I'd like to know whether, after all these answers and on gas and all the questions on gas, whether LNG is compatible with the Paris Accords. Thank you.
Madam Simson.
Thank you, Mr. González Casares. You raised a very important question about interconnections. And the target 10% has been once already postponed. Now it is for 2020, and we raised the target for interconnections for 2030, we raised it to 50%. So what can we do? We can promote regional cooperation and we can finance the missing links. So that is what is going on also right now, that Iberian Peninsula will get interconnection via Biscay Bay interconnection, and this is financed by Connecting Europe facility. This is not enough, and there you need more interconnections. I do understand you very well, because regions that do not belong to the core Europe need these kind of connections for their electricity market. But I do believe that this Biscay Bay link is a very good start. Question about LNG and will it be useful for our long-term targets for climate neutrality? Well, towards climate neutrality, we have to work more for hydrogen and low-carb CO2 gases, also towards e-gases and biogases. And if we are building a gas network, we have to keep in mind that after 2030 it has to be future-proof. And that means a lot of research towards hydrogen. Thank you.
Thank you. A follow-up question?
Thank you for your answers. Siguiendo con las interconexiones.
Thank you very much. Still on interconnections, I wanted to be a little bit more specific. You yourself said that at the moment we're finding it difficult to fulfill our interconnection targets. You talked about some abstract measures, but we might find ourselves in a situation where some countries don't focus on interconnections. So my question is, will you, the European Commission, take measures in order to help those who want to advance with interconnections?
Madam Simson?
Yes, of course. Those targets for interconnections, they are negotiated in EU level. And these targets are for all the EU member states, not only 15% by 2030, but there are also targets for the part of interconnection that should be open for market. And if there is a regulation in EU level, then all the member states should work to achieve this, towards the aim to achieve it. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker is Madam Weiss from EPP.
Ja, tak.
Thank you very much. Congratulations with your nomination, and thank you for your answers. I'm over here, just in front of you. I would like to ask you about increased energy efficiency for buildings. As far as I've understood from your reply to Mr. Kelly, we already have all the tools. It's just a matter of using them in the member states. In Ms. von der Leyen's mission letter, you've been asked to accelerate the efficiency of building. The guidelines for energy efficiency was adopted last year and will come into force soon. It imposed a number of requirements, and that buildings should be close to energy efficiency under 2021, but by 2050, all buildings should be energy efficient and carbon neutral. But we still have a renovation rate of 1% per annum. So I'd like to know how you're going to accelerate rates and how you're going to improve the energy efficiency for buildings. Are you going to open up this directive, which has been adopted once more? Thank you.
Thank you. Madam Simson.
Thank you. At first, the tool that I can use to monitor the energy efficiency retrofitting rate in my hand is national energy and climate plans. So we will see what will be the actual targets for every respective member country by the end of this year. I know that there are concerns that they will not altogether meet the targets, but we have 3 more months to negotiate with member states and give them best advice. Of course, they are waiting for the advice also what kind of financial support they can expect. And there are different ways how we can support these kind of actions, different funds. The biggest fund for all the energy investments will be Connecting Europe facility, but at the same time for renovation rates, we have to keep in mind that biggest chunk of the money must come from private sector. There have to be favorable loans available, and of course in local level there has to be legislation that allows multi-apartment buildings to take this kind of loans if there are several owners, and there might be legal difficulties to accommodate this kind of loans. So close cooperation with member states and available loans is the addition to current plans. Thank you.
Follow-up, Madam Vice.
Ja, tak.
Thank you. The buildings which have the lowest energy efficiency are often inhabited by people who have low income. And some of these buildings would have to be taken out of the building stock altogether. When will you have a rapid how will you rapidly take these buildings out of the building stock while at the same time making sure that people with low incomes have access to good and affordable housing? Thank you.
Madam Simson.
Thank you for the question. And yes, exactly this is the aim, that we will renovate buildings that are inefficient right now. Some of them might be in the situation where it is not comfortable to comfortable temperature during winter months because they are so inefficient. Certainly the problem is that heating bills are higher than they should be or than they will be after renovating. I know that there are a couple of member states, 4 of them, who have made national plans that they will invest into social housing renovations because there are the tenants who are most affected by prices, and this is one of the practices we can consider. But the aim is that after the renovation, heating costs will come down and comfortable temperatures are easier to achieve. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, Madam Rego from GUE.
Señora
Ms. Simpson, I feel rather more concerned now than when I arrived when it comes to the climate emergency and what is asked of us in terms of policies in Europe. And hearing your replies today, which don't promise much. There's a small group of big companies sharing the market, and they are imposing their model of distribution and production on across the board. The consequences are dire. We have more than 50 million Europeans suffering energy poverty, and obviously the revolving doors problem exists, and it's all about defending these few companies' interests. And what you've presented to us is not going to solve the climate emergency. It's more of the same, talking about an energy transition that protects the interests of those businesses. Can you commit to some genuine measures when it comes to transforming the European energy model towards a sustainable model? And can you give us some concrete measures, please? Thank you.
Madam Simson.
Thank you for your question, and I can confirm you that this Commission will be very committed to our climate targets, and not only in my level responsible for energy, but this is commitment of President-elect. This is the overarching priority. This will be the main responsibility for Vice President Frans Timmermans, who is responsible for Green Deal. So there will be a climate law, there will be a clear action plan, but my responsibility as Commissioner responsible for energy is also to secure that fulfilling all those targets, we still stay in the position where our energy security is there, where our customers will have affordable prices, and our industry will have and remain competitive compared to other regions in the world. And of course, one of my responsibilities will be also reaching out via energy dialogues, because we have to motivate also our partners that they will do their share. These are my tools. I can closely cooperate with member states and motivate them to raise their targets. I can cooperate with commissioners responsible for funding and explain that the biggest lack of funding is right now for energy efficiency, but there has to be significant raise of funding also for research and innovation. And that is what I commit I will do. But overarching aim is the one that by 2050, Europe will be first climate neutral continent. Thank you.
Thank you. A follow-up.
Parece que hay una. Well, that seems to be a bit contradictory. Perhaps I should be even clearer. There's a direct link between the energy model and climate change that's been identified. And it's just a few who are in control, and they're externalizing environmental costs. So it's all in the interest of doing their business. And what we're seeing is a real risk of the sustainability for our planet. And we need to do our fair share. So this is all to do with the energy model. Efficiency, democratic scrutiny, and controlling consumption and demand. I want a clear statement. Which side are you on? Are you on the side of the big multinationals, ERG, Vattenfall, and all the other companies, or on the side of those who are fighting for a planet that can survive and be alive for future generations?
Madam Simson.
Thank you. Well, energy consumers will be heart of our energy policy. So this is my task to provide affordable energy, and that we can do by diversifying our sources, by the policy that all the energy grids and DSOs will be very transparent, and providers, of course, will be transparent too. And then investments that will help to upgrade our grids, to build missing links and interconnections. And we all will benefit if there will be closer cooperation, at first at regional level, but then from internal market, that bigger market will bring more competitive prices to our consumers. So we can achieve our goals only when there is a public acceptance and support. Right now it is there, and it will stay there if our people see that this comes with competitive prices. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker is Madam Griffin.
Thank you. In the last mandate, fighting energy poverty was enshrined for the first time in European law. Almost 50 million European households cannot afford to pay their energy bills, and in 2019 are having to choose between eating or heating or cooling their homes. There are long-term sick and elderly people dying in the heat because they cannot afford to put their air conditioning on. The national energy and climate plans submitted by member states are insufficient. How do you intend to improve the NECPs, and what mechanisms will you put in place for the expertise of climate stakeholders to be properly engaged in this process? What technical support are you planning for exchange of good practice from member state to member state to ensure that the highest standards of ambition are achieved and that people are at the heart of energy policy, especially the energy poor? Thank you.
Madam Simpson.
Thank you. And I can assure you that the report that you made on the previous mandate has set a very good example. What should we expect from our member states and regions? So this will be also part of the national energy and climate plans, how they will deal with those people who are not able to pay their heating or cooling bills, or who are just in trouble paying their electricity bills. And right now they have drafted only draft plans. We will see what will be in the final plans by the end of this year. But this will be part of the annual report also. There is also the situation that each member state defines energy poverty in its own way. And in that regard, I do believe that Energy Poverty Observatory will give us a clear definition how to cover this topic in the same way all around the European Union. Thank you.
Thank you. Follow-up question?
Thank you. I'm pleased to hear that at last we're going to get a definition of energy poverty, but I would like to know how you intend to improve the draft plans, because at the moment they're kind of range from barely sufficient to woeful. And I want to know how you are going to engage the expertise of climate stakeholders in improving the plans, what resources, what technical assistance. But I'd like to ask you a kind of political question, because I believe that energy is not a commodity. Energy is a basic social right. As Commissioner-designate for Energy for 500 million European citizens, what do you believe? Thank you.
Madam Simson.
Yes, I do agree that the energy provides us social inclusiveness, and that's why it is very needed service. At the same time, when we are talking about energy poverty, we are not talking about energy as such as commodity. We are also talking about taxes, levies, creed, tariffs, and all this all together has to be under our attention. And you asked what we can do concretely for those people who are in trouble paying their heating bills. We can provide more efficient ways for heating. This is not something we can do right everywhere tomorrow, but there are different technologies that will bring down heating costs. And of course, once again, the building renovation of the building stock plays an important role too. Thank you.
Thank you. Now is the next speaker is Madame Paulus from the Greens.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Ms. Simson, for being here today with us. I will continue in German. Wir haben festgestellt, dass
we've noted that that on the way to a zero emissions universe, we need less gas infrastructure and not more. So we're glad that you wrote that in your letter. I can agree with you on that. But I have a question, because there's a tendency to overestimate the need for gas, and I would like to know whether you're going to ensure that the investments through the European Investment Bank or for joint interest projects will focus on the energy needs, so we don't have any gaps in the fossil energy supply, and we've no stranded assets. But at the same time, we're investing in an energy neutral world, so we need really a good estimate of energy needs. How do you feel about that?
Madam Simpson.
Thank you for the question. And about investments that will come from different sources, but one of the sources will be European Investment Bank, or part of it that will be future climate bank. These investments, they have to be aligned with our climate targets. And this is clear that towards climate neutrality, the priority will be for those projects that are investing into renewables, into energy efficiency, and also into the grids. So to achieve our targets, we need also better connections, and that's why the investment rates into grids will be needed. If we are talking about CEF funding, then we see that compared to a couple of years ago, there will be less and less gas projects and more renewable projects and electricity connection projects. So this is a trend that is clear, and I think that under current Commission we will see the fourth round of PCI lists, and there will be also a decrease of gas projects in that list compared to the previous one. Thank you.
A follow-up question, Madam Paulus.
Ja, vielen Dank. Sie haben gerade.
Thank you. You talked about Climate Bank, and you talked about our climate objectives. Well, I have a question about the methane strategy, because methane at the moment is 15 to 20%. According to UNCFFF, it doesn't stay as long in the atmosphere, 12 years, but the potential, the carbon potential is 85% higher, the climate potential is 85% higher. Now, you're talking about diversification, needing more energy terminals, we need more suppliers in the market. I'd like to know what your strategy is to make sure that we don't that we don't undermine our climate goals because of the methane leakage. We were talking about 10% here.
Madam Simson.
This is true that methane leakage is one of the problems that we do have here in Europe. We are even in worse position compared to our main partners, and we can learn from their experience. There will be initiative on the field of methane and methane leakage, and members of European Parliament will be very closely involved for this strategy. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker is Madam Czech from Renew.
Thank you. President-elect von der Leyen emphasized her desire to lead a geopolitical commission, and there is hardly another policy domain in Europe with more obvious geopolitical implications than energy. I'm glad that you were nominated to lead the energy profile, as I know well that you think Europe is stronger when member states are unified behind our common goals, as we strive to make Europe greener, more sustainable, and more energy efficient. But these goals must also be reflected in member states' national energy and climate plans, although regretfully there are some notable exceptions. Some governments of high emission intensity countries are afraid that the economic burden of the transition is simply too big, which increases the risk of a new East-West divide in the EU and also endangers our shared pursuit for a climate-neutral EU. I was happy to hear that just during this session, Estonia supported reaching the EU climate neutrality targets, but there should be more countries to follow. As Commissioner, what measures would you deem necessary in order to encourage those member states that are lagging behind with their commitments to revise their national targets regarding both the NECPs and in general terms as well?
Madam Simson.
Thank you, Katalin, for bringing such a good news. Well, I'm here without any internet connection, so I didn't know that. But that is a question to the previous, that is the answer to the previous questions, and I'm really happy about that. So about national energy and climate plans, we do see that different member states are committing themselves at a different level, and this is also because the starting point is different. Each and every member country has a different energy mix, and some of member countries are heavily dependent on fossil fuels. This is part of their local industry. This is also part of the social security topics. And we have to be aware that they need special support. So as it almost the end of the hearing, I will also again mention the Just Transition Fund. I know that members of ITRE committee know very well why it was created, but I see it as a new tool that exactly helps those member countries who do have goal regions to prepare better for the exit of solid fossil fuels. And this is different than globalization fund that comes in after the jobs are lost. This helps to create strategy for each member country, and this will be definitely the solid tool if we are negotiating with member states about their targets, and in upcoming 3 months we are still negotiating, and our aim is to provide as ambitious targets as we can get. Thank you.
A follow-up. would be very important to incentivize member states, and especially those with lower income regions, to reorient their energy and climate policies in order to facilitate their energy transition. I'm looking forward to your suggestions on that. And also I would like to follow up on some of the previous colleagues' question on emission reduction in the housing sector, but also in the transport sector. This is a particularly relevant problem in the regions such as the Central Eastern European region, where transport and housing infrastructure tend to be less energy efficient, representing a larger proportion in all emissions compared to other regions. I think it would be important to develop a close cooperation with other commissioners, such as Commissioner Ferreira in the regional development portfolio, and also the future transport commissioner to be. I'm curious if you have any plans on how to cooperate with them, and what kind of plans do you have for the future work? Thank you.
Madam Simson.
Thank you. I do consider myself as a very good team worker, so I'm also looking forward for cooperation, and not only with my fellow commissioners, but also with Parliament and Member States, because without this kind of cooperation, we can't achieve those ambitious targets. So in the previous Commission, Commissioner Arias Cañete was responsible both for DG Ener and Klima. In the future cabinet, I will closely cooperate with Executive Vice President Frans Timmermans, who is also responsible for DG Klima and who is coordinating our joint efforts to achieve lower emissions in broader sectors. So I see lots of smart integration with sectors like transport, housing, heating and cooling, but also in industry. And this is also the future structure of our Commission, that we will all work together under the overarching topic. So thank you.
Thank you too. Now, last speaker from today's list of members who raised question, Madam Spiraki, EPP.
Thank you, Chair. Well, Commissioner-designate, I'm here. Well, because I am the last who is asking, I would like to insist on some kind of details on two topics related to our common goal, to our carbon neutral goal. First, it is the establishment of Just Transition Fund. When it will take place, which amount of funding would be available, and how the 41 EU regions dependent on coal will benefit from it. Second related question is, according to the President-elected Ursula von der Leyen, the Commission plans to establish a carbon border tax, which is intended to reduce carbon leakage and subsequently reduce its impact on the effectiveness of EU policy on the border. So, could you please give us some further details on this topic as well? Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Simpson.
Thank you for the questions. First question was about Just Transition Fund. And this fund was also mentioned in my mission letter, but the commissioner who will bring forward the exact plan will be Commissioner Ferreira. As much as I concern, I do see that Just Transition Fund will build on the project for coal regions in transition, and it will help also small islands who are missing the connections with mainland. This should help each region to be better prepared for the transition from fossil fuels towards renewables. The exact amount of this fund is still under negotiations, but because it will be part of next MFF, it is an initiative that will be on our table on first weeks of next Commission's mandate. So I predict that by the end of November there are already concrete answers. But I do my best that it will be big enough to support those regions to prepare for transition. About carbon border tax, it is also the project of cooperation and cooperation of several commissioners, who are responsible for trade, for financing, and I will provide my input too. Unfortunately, I can't elaborate more.
Madam Spiraki, follow-up question?
This is my follow-up because I would like to have some kind of further details on the implementation and operation on the so-called mechanism of border adjustment mechanism, because as I have already known, the Commissioner-designate Gentiloni was not able to answer to this question too. So the question is if there is any kind of preparation in this Commission-designate in order to start working on this topic, or it's just a topic.
Simson.
Thank you. The carbon border tax as a topic has to replace current mechanism that, and it has to be better than current mechanism that deals with carbon leakage. So there is not final plan as such. There are lots of ideas, and there is also input from different member states that have the concrete problems with unfair competition. But if we are talking about carbon border tax, it has to be compatible to WTO rules. That means that we can't take it like disguised restrictions for international trade. I know that we can take carbon border tax also regionally and sector-based, and there has been also cases that we are closing down our power plants, but then we are importing coal power from countries that don't pay CO2 prices. This is like electricity sector, very local market, regional market case, but a very clear case of unfair competition and between, for example, Spain and Morocco. So these are the sectorial questions we have to negotiate and analyze. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. That concludes our rounds of questions. Now, Madam Simson, you have the opportunity for 5 minutes to give us your closing remarks. So when you're ready, you have the floor.
I am, thank you. Honourable members of the European Parliament, fellow Europeans online, thank you all for this extremely important hearing, at least for me. It has been quite intense, but I hope I managed to respond clearly to many of your questions, and that I managed to express my concerns. I am a firm believer in the cooperation between commissioners and the members of the European Parliament. I do not take today's dialogue as a one-off, but as a starting point for a strong and constant cooperation if appointed as Commissioner. And I look forward to working with you and meeting with you as a core part of my job. I have enjoyed our debates during the Estonian EU presidency in 2017. As Commissioner in charge of a portfolio relying on a great amount of EU legislation, I will ensure that members of European Parliament are regularly updated, consulted and involved. Today's hearing reconfirms that the Parliament is a great ally in taking forward the European Green Deal, a partner in shaping the future of Europe. You heard my ideas and goals for the future in my opening statement and amongst my answers to your questions, but please let me re-emphasize just a few points. It is clear that at the top of your concerns is the question of our climate. Without taking concrete steps now, there will be no bright future, and we have to act now. That is why the President-elect has identified the European Green Deal as a leading priority for the next Commission. I find it obvious that energy policy will be essential to deliver on these priorities, since 75% of CO2 emissions are linked to energy. The Energy Union will remain a solid foundation for the Green Deal, making sure that adequate levels of ambition are achieved in 2030 and beyond. Effective implementation of the existing legislation, in particular the Clean Energy Package, will be key in the path towards increased ambition. I would also like to stress that I will strive to maintain a balance when working towards a real energy union and across all its 5 dimensions. With the Energy Union, the EU has created a unique opportunity to secure sustainable, reliable and affordable energy for our citizens and industry. It has created a unique legislative framework of energy and climate governance on which we have to build our future actions. My future actions will focus in particular on the energy efficiency first principle and on speeding up clean energy deployment across the economy. Key elements will be the promotion of a power system largely based on renewables and the smart integration of the electricity, heating, transport and industry. The internal energy market based on regional cooperation and the international energy dimensions are also important for achieving our ambitions. Many of you also stressed the importance of the technological advances. My focus will be on this. We cannot think that the transition is only a matter of rules or regulatory framework. It is unthinkable that Europe can become climate neutral by 2050 without a colossal effort in research and innovation to develop new technologies. This is also a way to enhance our industrial potential. Many of you mentioned the fight against energy poverty, and for fairness, we cannot accept that millions of Europeans struggle to pay their bills or see their energy bill rising out of proportion. The fight against energy poverty is a matter of solidarity and also ensures that we have the public support needed for the transition. Every step we take from here onwards must be taken with one eye on the consumer. We have to have their support and understanding. Many of you also asked about what the EU can do for specific national or regional situations, especially for more vulnerable regions and small countries. Together, we are all stronger. In our constant strive for a better future, not one single member state or region can be left behind. For this, I will work to deliver a Just Transition Fund as part of the President-elect's vision of a just transition where nobody is left behind. Dear members of the European Parliament, so far I have talked in English, but let me conclude in my native Estonian. Mul on siiras au.
Thank you. I'm very honored to be here at a time when Europe is changing. When the President-elect Ursula von der Leyen has set the goal for Europe to be the first climate neutral continent by 2050. I am fully supporting her in that, and I'm ready to take on that role. And I believe that with you, dear members of Parliament, members of the European Parliament, we can achieve this. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Simson. Thank you very much, colleagues, for your participation. Now the hearing stops here. Let me remind you that we will have in-camera meeting this afternoon with coordinators in order to evaluate this hearing. So thank you very much again.